What's up, my fellow welders? If you want to see how I took $167 and turned it into a $2,000 profit, come check this out. All right, so I'm going to walk you through the process I took to fabricating and installing this handrail, rewinding right back to taking measurements on site. I had to dig sonotubes, I had to pour concrete, I had to drill holes and set epoxy, and right into installing that handrail. Let's go to the job site. I'm going to take a second and give you a little bit of free advice. I mentioned to get a deposit before you start purchasing materials, before you start doing any work. The last rule I keep with myself is that when I install on that last day, I require payment. So whether it be cash, whether it be e-transfer, whatever it is, just make sure you get paid for the job. The last thing you want to do is have to go chase a customer around, and I've had to do it. So keep that in mind. Welcome to my job site. Customer determined that she wanted 2 5-foot railings sort of sloping down on these steps and the steps down at the bottom of the hill, and then a return or a 90 coming off that. So the first step is to come in and remove any of that vegetation. Make sure you check with the customer that they're aware of anything that you're gonna alter in terms of landscape. My next step is to hammer in some stakes so I can run my string line and take some measurements. Once I've got my straight line located, I was able to start digging those holes. Now I came in with just a regular clam shovel. This is up on a big hill, we don't really see it, but one option would have been to come in with an auger, a 1-person or a 2-person auger, but for the amount of holes I had to do, it just wasn't worth it. So it all depends on your area and where you're located. We're up in the north here, and we know that we get frost, we get frigid temperatures, so we got to come down at least 3.5 feet to avoid that frost line. Otherwise, that concrete could heave and it could throw off the railing later on down the road. So make sure you check your area to find out how far you would have to dig. As mentioned, there's 2 parts to this railing. There's actually 3 rails in total. So once we've got our holes dug for that first handrail, we're moving on to that second area. Here I just came in with my skill saw and started chopping branches. So this is where we really had to make sure the customer was okay with this. And make sure we clean up that spot again the same way we did in that first one. Wash, rinse, and repeat. I'm gonna do a 90-degree turn, and that's gonna give us that railing that's gonna come across. In this case here, I've got some 1/2-inch gravel, and that's gonna help the water sort of not collect and pool at the bottom of your concrete sonotube. The next step is to slide in those sonotubes, measure and cut. For the fun part, we're mixing concrete. I'm just using regular Saccrete in a bag. You add water to it. Make sure you read the package so you know how much water. The last thing you want is for your concrete to be runny. I was always told to have kind of a consistency of peanut butter. I don't know if it's true. It seems to work for me. Now, once you pour that concrete into your sonotubes, drive a rod or some sort of piece of wood to get rid of any air pockets in there. Okay, so this is my return. This is the 90-degree. I know that the yard is level, so I'm putting my level on these 2 sonotubes to make sure that, you know, we're not sloped too much or anything. Now we're gonna wash, rinse, and repeat on this. Clean up all the junk. You wanna make sure that you got all your tools with you while leaving, and that you left the property in the exact same shape that you got here with. I'm at my steel supplier right now, going into Lucon Metal. I'm gonna go get my 1.5-inch square tubing for this railing. Got my steel here, good to go. I've got my materials dragged into my little garage here, and you can tell it's a simple project because I've got my 1.5-inch square tubing by 100 wall, and I've got my base plates. They're already punched out. Those are about 3/16 thick. The one thing I am missing is my 1.25-inch sleeves that are gonna go into the side of these railings. Before I get started, the one thing I like to do is just to wipe off any of the grease or grime that's on there from the factory. Even if it's just with a dry cloth, I'm gonna wet this thing, but afterwards, before we paint this thing, before we even prime it, I'm gonna go over this whole thing probably with some methyl hydrate or some form of degreaser to remove all that junk before we paint. Before I even start cutting any pieces whatsoever, one thing I like to do is just to lay our railing out and have a real life representation of what this thing's gonna look like. So I've got my 2 sonotubes right here. They're 8 inches. I determined that I've got about 8 inches difference between this height and this height, and that's essentially one large step. So now that I've got this thing, I can have a look at it and I can say, this actually looks good. I can actually come in and take measurement of my 2 angles at the top and down here as well. And then I'm gonna know they're accurate and I'm gonna know that it's gonna fit perfectly. I have my little layout, my little drawing that I produced for myself. This is not an engineered drawing. This is just something I made up for reference to make sense of the project. I took notes when I was on site of certain dimensions and certain locations. So this is what I'm working off of. This is what's working for me. Now, if someone else had to reproduce this, I don't know that this would be the best option. I would want to clean this up and sort of do this properly. You can tell I'm in the garage today, so I don't even have a horizontal bandsaw, things like that. So I'm using my chop saw, which is an abrasive disc. You can also use an angle grinder. You just got to kind of keep that nice and square. I might do an option of both here. All right, I'm just sharpening my soapstone so that I can get some nice, accurate lines on here. Make sure you got this to a fine point, otherwise your big old fat soapstone there will give you an inaccurate indication of your lines. I got my angle that I found off my layout here. I don't know if you can read that, but that's about 85.5 degrees. I used my fancy dancy little angle finder to determine that. This one's a bit longer than this guy here. This one's less accurate on the larger scale, but when transferring onto my steel, I like to use this little guy. You can pick this up for like $3 at your hardware store, so might be a little bit more now with inflation. Okay, so I've got 85.5. All right, make sure I've got that on the right side. Okay, I got my mark now, and I'm gonna transfer these lines down so that I can transfer them to the other side, because I'm cutting this with a zip cut. Remember, I don't have a bandsaw here today. All right, we're moving along here just great. I've got all 3 of my railings laid out. I got all my angles cut. I got all the ends cleaned up, and we're all prepped to start TIG welding. Now remember that process. We're gonna kind of acquire our material. We're gonna cut it all. We're gonna lay it all out. We're gonna do it all at once, just so that we're not cutting a little bit, welding a little bit, and jumping back and forth. We wanna be as efficient as we can on this. You're gonna notice there's no upright on my little small railing there, and that's because it's gonna connect to an existing member, and I'll show you that a little bit later. Folks, we're welding with Lincoln's 200 square wave. It's gonna be on straight DC, 100% argon, of course, for TIG welding. I'm gonna be using a stainless filler rod, and that's just some stuff that I had hanging around. It's 309. It's as close as that I have right now. You might be wondering why I'm not using the MIG or flux core or anything like that. The fact is that I'm just trying to use up what I have in the shop. All right, I'm at about 160 amps. That might be a little bit much for that 100 thou wall that we're welding, but I want the extra beans just for tacking and just to have it there, kind of the way I like to weld, and then I can sort of feather off if I have to. Other thing is that I've got a number 8 gas lens. I've got this sort of stubby back on it. I like that. It's just a little bit nicer than a great big tail. And I've got a 1.5% lanthanated 332 tungsten. Let's get going. Again, we make do with what we have, right? Still make money. So things have been going good. I've been having to sort of alternate between the floor and the table just because of the space I have. And my table is not quite big enough for the larger size railing that I'm doing. So what I did is I tacked it up on the floor, and then I scooted it up on the table to make sure that, you know, everything is nice and flat and square. And then putting in my cross member right now, I'm gonna put some tacks. One thing to recognize is when you're tacking with that stainless steel, just be careful, because it does like to pull a little bit more. Make sure you got that clamped down properly. So I found myself a little small chunk of mild steel, and that's what I'm tacking with right now. All right, let's keep going. Now that I got my railings all fit up, they're all fabricated, it's time to weld. You're gonna notice I don't have my base plates on, and that's because we're gonna do those last. They just kind of get in the way while I'm flipping this thing. And then we have to cap any open end as well. And I've got my 1.25" sleeve, which I'm gonna show you how that goes on afterwards. But for now, it's just time to weld. All right, I'm just going around here and I'm giving it some extra strength here before I weld it. I don't want this thing pulling on me. I don't want this thing to go out of square because this has to fit up on some sono tubes that I've already poured. So I don't want to have to come back and cut this thing out. This one here is missing a cross member, so I've got some braces on this right now, or I've got one brace and that's just holding it back. I've also changed it to pulse so that I'm controlling my heat a little bit better on this. I'm not putting too much heat into this plate, into this tubing, so that it warps on me. Yeah, fit up on this stuff is so important because this is where you end up distorting your piece, filling gaps. All right, got one more to go. It's finally time to put our base plates on and cap the ends. I got a few extra inches on this guy here. I'm gonna cut that off as well. This is about the only time you're gonna see me use a magnet, only because I find they just get in the way. But in a case like this, where I have to measure and I gotta kind of have my tape there and give it a tack or take, I'd much rather just use a magnet. I'll give it one little tack. As long as it can hold, I'll get rid of the magnet because you don't want this guy in the way. This guy will just give you arc flow. It'll cause all sorts of problems for you. Okay, so this step is very important now that we've got all our handrails welded out. We want to make sure we clean this properly. And I'm using a methyl hydrate, but you can even use paint thinner. You can use a lot of stuff, but I find methyl hydrate really gets the grease and all the dirt off. Now, because it's not going for powder coating, it's very important that we do a good job here. We're gonna put a few coats, probably gonna put 4 coats in total, 2 primers and then 2 paint. It's not gonna stop it from rusting. It will prolong the life a little bit and give it a bit of a chance, a bit of a head start on this. So make sure that you read the can. If you're using spray bombs, if you're using any paint, really make sure we're reading the can, the instructions. There's a certain dwell time. There's a certain cure time before you can put a second coat on. So just make sure that you're making reference to that. This is me kind of priming it, giving it a good prime, giving it a couple coats, and then we're gonna do the same thing with that black paint. We're going with a flat black, sort of obsessed with this. I think it looks so nice whenever it's done. We're gonna install that railing today. This is the first day it's actually nice out. It's been so freaking hot and it's been raining like crazy. So I'm looking forward to getting it done. So let's go check this out. I'd say that this concrete is cured. It's been quite a few weeks since we've come back. Got a bit of sweeping to do on this, but let's go look at the other two. I just had them covered in case. Looks good. That one looks good as well. So let's go have a look at our railings now. Go unwrap them and start fitting. With my railing in place, that doesn't matter right now. I'm just going around with some 1/2-inch gravel and I'm filling up these holes where I didn't backfill completely, just to make sure that these are nice and stable. We get winters, it's very cold. The chances of this heaving because of frost is much greater than warmer climates. So I just want to make sure that we're well supported in this. All right, let's look at number 2 and 3. That fits beautifully. I'm so happy. Clamped up right there. That's a good feeling. Everything fits. It's got the right slope. So now that I have my railing lined up on the pads, I'm going to come in with my hammer drill, and I'm just using a regular hammer drill here. We can't use a regular drill. We need something that sort of oscillates back and forth for drilling concrete. I'm just sort of scoring the tops of these plates kind of through those holes, and then I'm going to come in, I'm going to remove the rail, I'm going to drill my holes completely. Now with my holes all scored, I'm going to come in and drill these right down to the bottom. So I'm going to go down about 3 inches or so, and then I'll be able to set enough epoxy for those to hold. You want to take your time. You want to let the drill bit do the work on this. The last thing you want is for that concrete to crack, because then you got to come in, you got to put epoxy. It's just a nightmare. So take your time. My drill bit's about 5 inches long, or I should say 6 inches long, and I got about 5 inches deep. So I'm gonna cut these around 7 or 8 inches long each, and then I'm gonna chop off the excess. I gave my railing a dry fit. So I've got my threaded rods that can come out easily. I'm gonna insert this stuff, I'm gonna fill my holes, I'm gonna set my rods, and then we're gonna put this thing on top. It says not to torque these until the epoxy has been completely cured. So I think in 45 minutes it says I can probably start turning these a little bit. I might just leave it for overnight and then come back and give them a final torque. That's a wrap. That's not a bad return for 3 days work. We dug holes, we poured sonotubes with concrete, we fabricated that handrail, we painted it, and we installed it. But the most important part is that I got paid on time. So I got my eyes on a plasma machine that I'm gonna go have a look at. I'm not trying to get richer, I'm just trying to feed my tool habit. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Be sure to like, follow myself at Sewing with Fire Welding and Weld.com. But most important, get in that Weld app and post some of your cool handrails. I'd love to see them. And as always, keep those lenses clean.